Thanks very much. Anything you can make from a barrel of oil, you can make from a tree. It's a great line. Thanks for giving me a chance to speak to you today. I haven't pulled out a prepared talk, so I'm going to just talk with you rather than just give a prepared speech because I thought it deserved a bespoke talk as a bespoke audience. So I work in Cleantech, and what that really means is we are trying to invest in technologies that are capable of disrupting incumbents in terms of energy production, and upcycle any waste stream that may exist. By upcycle, I mean add value. And the technologies that enable one to do that in an economic fashion. So we have about 200 million of assets that were under management. These are small enterprises. And I don't view clean tech as a sector. People often thought of the internet as a sector years ago, right? It's folks with laptops and routers, and the internet now underpins the modern economy. You can't run a mining company or a forestry company or a film production company or a restaurant without some kind of a data strategy. In the same way, I think clean tech will be understood in fairly short order that it too is the underpinning of a new kind of economy, and an economy that produces and uses energy more intelligently and more cleanly. And as a resource-intensive country, we have some of the biggest partners at the table who are capable of sort of providing uptake for some of these technologies. And that's kind of the way I view the mining sector. I'm loath to tell miners how to run their own shop. I'm not a miner, but I do understand clean tech, and I do understand the kinds of innovations that are coming down the pipe and how they might benefit rather than be kind of a sideshow to any sector, automotive, forestry, whatnot. We know the problem we're trying to solve. I'm not going to spend much time on it. I was told this is a very educated crowd. But if you take this as a macroeconomic variable, that there is a single long-term pressure on traditional energy production, and that is we have to reduce carbon emissions. There's no two ways about it. You can talk about it all you want, but we are not even close to solving this problem. And so whatever economic advantage I am able to bring to that space, all of the companies I invest in can compete in the market today, no subsidies. I'd like to say to my investors, I'm extremely bullish on clean tech. We're going to make a ton of money, but I am extremely pessimistic as a human being because I understand we need an order of magnitude greater adoption than the market will do, even if we invent things that are better, faster, cheaper than the incumbents. Vaclav Smil has talked a lot about the amount of time it takes for infrastructure to turn over. It takes a lifetime, literally a lifetime, and we don't have that much time. And so when I look to other sectors, whether it's the pension funds that have invested in my fund, Equinor, the oil and gas company that's invested in my fund, or it's partners who are now coming to the table to bring to market some of our technologies like Hydrostorm. I'll talk about them in a moment. These are partners. These are corporate leaders who are at the table. I think 5 years ago, the difference was if you came up with a clean energy alternative that was roughly equivalent to a diesel genset, that wasn't good enough. Those people who were responsible for running that genset would say, I'm not taking technical risk. You got to do better than that. But I think something's changed. I've noticed in the past 3 or 4 years that corporate executives are now empowered to make decisions that are the right decisions environmentally, as long as you make at least a balance, right? So you don't have to spend more, but it's not going to be 10 times cost reduction. It's at the table and can compete. That's a big difference. And I think that's a difference because corporate leaders today understand this problem is real, and they want to be able to look their kids in the face and say they did something when the world got hot. And I think that's a very different kind of culture that I'm encountering in Canadian corporate boardrooms, and it's good to see. This is a price curve on a time scale that's relevant. The price of solar is roughly a vertical cut coming down on top of any other energy source that you will find. The same kind of thing is beginning to happen in energy storage. And for those of you who run remote mines, those two things, the cost of renewables and the cost of storage, are your best friend. So we are seeing, this is what happens with a technology-based energy source, right? Technologies do one thing in terms of performance. They go up in terms of performance. And they do one thing in terms of price. They come down in terms of price. That is the nature of technology versus natural resources. So we're seeing that happen in real time. The question is, so what? So that's really where I think it comes into play here. So a traditional innovative ecosystem, right? When we think about how do we have big corporates, automotive, forestry, mining, interact with the innovation ecosystem, right? The innovation ecosystem is deeply fragmented. There are thousands of startups out there, all have a better toaster than what you've got in your kitchen, right? And so it's very difficult to sort of navigate that space. I got to Mars, I founded the Cleantech practice there, going on God, 10 years ago, something like that. One of the things that we did was we ended up becoming a qualified window for folks like GE and Siemens, who would come to Canada. I mean, their executive team would come to Canada once a year, once a quarter, maybe. And they say, show me what you got in energy storage or smart grid or power electronics. And they could use Mars as kind of a filter for all that sort of entrepreneurial enthusiasm. I'm now, by the way, running ArcTern. I'm still with Mars as a volunteer, but I don't run that shop anymore. But this is how we view the traditional ecosystem. You have lots of universities, very smart engineers and chemists burrowing away in labs, making technologies. We have Mars, which sort of aggregates a lot of that work through sort of the way in which we advise entrepreneurs and so on. You have lots of innovation centers around the world, Climate Kick out of Europe, Cleantech Scandinavia, Cleantech incubators in Los Angeles. ArcTern has relationships with all of these, and folks like ArcTern. So we're working on the front lines, filtering opportunities and getting the market ready. And in case of ArcTern, of course, putting capital into play. So we've invested about 70 million so far. We've got about 130 more to go. So we ensure that companies are funded. We help build management teams and all the rest of it. In other words, we're the coaches and trainers that get the players ready for prime time. And then you go to your friends maybe at NORCAT who have in situ mines where you can act. If there's mine-specific tech, you can try it out in the field and they can reduce risk even more, and they have partnerships with mining companies, and you know all about NORCAT. That's kind of a traditional model, and it works, it's operational, and it's required. What I'm interested in, though, is not building neat toys that get a bit of market traction. I'm interested in moving the needle. As I said, I'm deeply pessimistic as a human being, and the issue now is scale. It is not about inventing new toys. We have all the toys we need in our closet. The question is, how do we get those things out in the market at scale? And that's where I think a different kind of model can be thought of. And this is, I think, how it works. I found this is the same. I built a hotel, and when we built that hotel, which is a building, like this is a building, it's not the architect or even the building owner that really decides what energy system will run that building. There is an engineering company that you hire that will decide whether you have geothermal, whether you have traditional air conditioning, how much insulation is in the walls, and so on and so on and so forth. The architect and the owner, unless they are deeply engaged, deeply knowledgeable, and highly motivated, are bit players in the decisions that are made about the energy systems in that hotel. Same as this building, almost the same for a food factory, and I'm pretty sure it's the same for a mine. So those who, this is very simplistic. So again, you're the ones that run the show, but as I understand it, there are owners who are really interested in profit, and they set the priorities for that mine. They own it. That includes the investors. There are operators, those who are responsible for the daily operation of that mine, and they're probably worried about things like reliability. It needs to run 24 hours a day, and I don't want to have any accidents, and my ore's got to be pure, and whatever. And then you have EPCs, the partners who are there to design what's in that energy system. Now, when you hire an EPC company and you're a mining company, the top engineers are put on the geotechnical stuff, right? Because that's the fun stuff. That's what the senior engineers will work on. Just as like with a building, the senior engineers are working with the architect on things like design. They're not deciding what furnace goes in the basement. That's one of the roadblocks in having market-ready innovation get to market at scale. Because EPCs are not given the priority of saying, design the best energy system you can. Goldcorp may be an exception, right? When the owner and operator of that mine says, it's a priority to me to build an all-electric mine, or it's a priority to me to make sure we're using 40% diesel consumption compared to our competitors, the EPC suddenly says, that's a priority. Oh, the C-suite is paying attention to that key performance indicator? Then I'm going to get some smart senior engineers working on this, and not a junior in the back who's going to cookie cut what they did last time. Because that's typically what you're going to do. Buy a diesel generator, make it a certain size, put the wires in the ground. It's not rocket science. But if you want to design a system that is 40% diesel consumption, you want some smart engineers. You only want the cutting edge, off-grid, microgrid guys at Hatch, for example, working on it. But you have to give that mandate to the EPC. If it doesn't happen at the EPC, if that priority isn't defined, then the energy system is going to be built by a junior in the back office who's going to cookie cut what's been done before. This is a primary block to scale in market as I see it, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, and you can question me in the Q&A. Maybe I'm wrong. But these are, I think, the real partners. So when I take this seriously enough that when ArcTern makes an investment, and we are looking right now at a long-term storage company called eZinc, the first thing I did was I went to Hatch in Montreal, and I said, you're the ones that are designing a whole lot of microgrid stuff. If I gave you the following tool with the following physical characteristics, what would it change about your engineering design? So I'm going to lower the cost of incremental kilowatt hours. I'm going to make, in other words, I'm going to change the design constraints that you work with. Will this make a difference? When I look to invest in a, believe it or not, a switchable maglev train track, right? Maglev trains are super cool and efficient, but they can't switch because you have to have the metal go around the track. And if you can't switch on the track, it's not very efficient. Well, there's a guy out of Calgary that can do that. First thing I did was I went to the big engineering companies and said, if you had a maglev train track that did the following, would it change your competitiveness in the market? Right? EPCs are the plumbers. What I build are tools, wrenches. And the only way I can decide if a wrench is of any use is to ask a plumber, will this get you more business? Will this get you higher profile business? Will this increase your profit margin and so on? So in my mind, the absolutely unsung hero of rewiring our economy into a low carbon economy are the EPCs. And I think that's probably exactly the same in the mining community. So this is really interesting. And if you expand the design space that now senior engineering team can work on, right? Then you can change lots of things that they can deliver that enables profit to be made, that at least it's a break-even proposition to go zero carbon, for example. And it, of course, doesn't affect reliability and all that kind of stuff. It becomes part of the design matrix. That's the job of Cleantech. That's my job. My job is to bring tools to the plumber and say, you can do new things with this tool. I need partners. The partners are those who decide to prioritize that thinking, because it does mean professional risk. It does mean you're stepping out of line. It does mean you're trying something new, which is what you don't do in big incumbent industries, right? You build a mine, you clip coupons. That's what you do when you build an energy plant. You build it and you clip coupons, right? And the coupons are predicated on nothing going wrong. So why would you take a risk? Well, corporate Canada, it's time to take some risks because we have a problem to solve. So you all know what a solar panel can do, right? So if you're off-grid, existing technology allows you to produce a whole bunch of solar power, but it's not there when you need it most of the time, and it's cloudy. What can you do with a bunch of solar panels? Well, maybe you could charge some vehicles, so you have some all-electric vehicles that you can at least charge while the sun is shining, and that's moderately interesting, I suppose. Energy storage is obviously a critical component here. What you often then do is, because PV came down in price so dramatically, you saw that vertical curve, now it's super cheap to overstuff a grid. So there are places, for example, where you pump water using PV panels, and you need a certain kick-on energy, where the pump kicks on. And so you don't put batteries on that system, you just overstuff it. So you pull the shoulders up of that solar farm, and that flat top is what the pump uses. So you do similar kinds of things I would assume in mines when you're looking to replace diesel gensets, which have an operating capacity. You overstuff them. When I was talking to the Hatch engineer about e-zinc, I said, I've got this great energy storage thing. You know, how much can you get off diesel by overstuffing with wind and solar? He said, well, I get to maybe 30% with a battery. And I said, wow, what if you really overstuff it and more storage? He said, well, storage isn't that interesting. And I was really surprised. And I said, well, if you had more storage, you could extend the shoulders of the PV curve into the dark. And he said, that's not how it works. Solar and wind is so cheap now. The way we get to 60 or 70% reduction is we overstuff like crazy using solar and wind. And all we use the battery for is to switch to the generator. It's almost like a giant capacitor. So the design constraint that's being worked on by Hatch doesn't really care about storage to get to 70. Right? You only use storage to get to 30 or 40. But if you had 12 to 24 hour storage at a cost of less than $25 a kilowatt hour, that changes the game, and you can then design 100% renewable systems that operate 24 hours a day with some design constraints depending on how much sun, how much wind there are, and so on. So again, those are all tools that are decided at the level of the EPC. I don't figure that out. The mining company doesn't figure that out. The EPC figures that out. And giving them the tools to increase that design space is interesting. So the information flow goes two ways, right? We produce technologies that increase the design space for the EPC, who are motivated by an owner and operator who says, here's my mandate for the mine. And we also learn from the EPC. We learn that, well, storage isn't going to be interesting because it's not what gets you to 70%. What gets you to 70% is a diesel genset on standby and a bunch of overstuffed wind and solar. What gets you to 100%, though, is I need 24 hours storage. So 4 hours is interesting, 8 hours is interesting, 12 means nothing to me, 18 means nothing to me. Get me 36 hours, and now I change my design space. So when we invest in that company, our feedback to them is to say, you may think it's better to do 12 hours and 6 hours. It doesn't make a difference. You need to get to 36 hours. You're not worth anything. So the information flow goes both ways. And those are all predicated on real projects that Hatch is working on in the real world. What you really want, though, of course, is baseload. Everybody knows you want baseload, right? We can play with things a little bit, but you want 24-hour power. That's how mines operate, 24 hours a day. It's coming, as a matter of fact. So one of our companies, I'm sure some of you have heard of Hydrostorm. So the irony about Hydrostorm is, so they're building, it's an underwater compressed air energy storage. Its partnership with mining goes deep, literally and figuratively. They mine a 400-meter deep shaft, build a cavern the size of a football field, fill it with water, and you have an air pipe and a water pipe. And to store energy, you run a compressor, industry standard GE stuff, fill the cavern with air, push the water out, and the water in the 400-meter deep shaft keeps it under a constant pressure, and you steal temperature as you compress it. You store that temperature and put it back. So it's constant pressure, adiabatic air compression. Extremely cheap. 50 megawatts and up, 50 megawatts, 8 hours and up, there isn't a technology on the planet that comes close to the cost of Hydrostorm. So they are building something in Australia right now called Angas with a mine, an operating mine, and they are able to overstuff, so you have 4 times the solar than you do of the storage. You run the mine on solar all day long. You take half that solar, stuff it down into compressed air in a mine, and when the sun goes down, you release it. And they are able to provide 24-hour-a-day baseload power that is 100% renewable at a lower cost than that mine is able to get that power from the grid. That's today. So the partnerships on Hydrostorm is the mine is the offtake. The mining industry is part of what takes away all the geotechnical risk from this stuff. So we do have mining partners that will work on this stuff. We have about 4.5 gigawatt hours of projects under development around the world: California, Arizona, Australia, Canada, with partners like Gravity, Rainbow, and so on. This is a mature technology. This is a technology ready for prime time. That's an operating plant. It's being commissioned as we speak in Goderich, Ontario. Though there's some potential mine sites on the bottom that we're scoping out for existing projects. And this is the project that's being built in South Australia. Capital cost is around $20 million. We will operate that plant. We, being Hydrostorm, will operate it as a merchant facility, and we will sell that power behind the grid to a mine. And that mine will save money. What this plant gets us in terms of market traction, you can see the numbers. We have $250 million performance guarantee coverage from our primary EPC partner, and we have $100 million bonding capacity from EDC, taking care of all the geotechnical risk. Those are for all future projects. We'll be announcing a funding round later this summer that is substantial, and the partners that are coming in on that funding round are very, very large financial infrastructure players who are investing to obtain the rights to invest in that 4.5 gigawatt hours of projects we have coming down the pipe. So when one thinks about the options that one has as an operating mine, it is not a solar panel and a lead acid battery and a 15% reduction in diesel fuel. This is what's in the market today now. There are others. I'd mentioned that company eZinc. It's actually a technology that was spun out of Inco when Inco got bought, and they carved off all their innovation stuff. You can store energy very, very cheaply for very, very long periods of time in the form of zinc. What's the right word in chemistry? It calcitates out of the fluid or something anyway. Very low cost, though, because the energy is stored in the form of physical zinc. It's about $20 per kilowatt hour incremental cost. It's another way of getting to full base load power. There's lots of other ways that efficiency and innovation plays with mines. A company called Shift out of, I think they're based in Sudbury. I know they're working with NORCAT. Our first investment in Fund 2, we invested in a company that does smart analytics and a bunch of sensors on buildings like this. So you move air more efficiently. That's all it does, right? What fan is operating at what speed and where's the air exchange. All it does is manipulate existing equipment. We can save energy 30–40% in any commercial building. And we announced that deal about 3 weeks ago. Shift does roughly the same thing in a mine, right? So that's sort of energy efficiency in a mine. MineSense, we all know these guys, right? Sensors on the end of a shovel to make sure you're taking the right ore to reduce the amount of stuff you got to move. So there's tons of other kinds of innovation that's coming down the pipe. NORCAT's a great place to look for it. That's my whole story. I've been sort of talking at you because I didn't really prepare these notes, but That's how I view, there is also one last major disruption to the industry as a whole, which is, of course, if you get a fully circular economy, you don't need to mine anything, right? You may not think this is a threat. You may think this is something off in the future, like Arizona industry utilities thought solar was a threat 10 years ago. Is upending their business model. Be careful. The ability to upcycle waste is becoming profound. We have a company called Green Mantra that takes waste plastic, doesn't recycle it, it upcycles it into high-value industrial waxes. We have a ton of other companies we're looking at that are able to target very particular outputs of our waste stream, grab them, and upcycle them. So there's a potential long-term rival, which is the urban mining mode, right? We're in a fully circular economy. I don't think it's going to happen for a while. I'm sort of overstating my case here, but you know, just keep me on your toes. That's my story. That's how innovation works from my perspective. It's not about toys. It's about scale. And the only way folks like me are able to deliver scale in the market, we get our job done, make sure it works, make sure it's economic, make sure it's got value. That's my job. When we do that, we need partners, because I'm perfectly happy making money for the next 10 years with my companies under status quo. That's fine. But I'm not interested in making tons of money in a world that heads to 4 degrees. We need partners in this fight. The mining industry is a clear partner, and that's the owner-operator who provides the mandate to the EPC to say, look a little harder for solutions, just like Goldcorp did for that mine. Something motivated that decision, changed the way that mine is going to operate. So that's my story. I appreciate you listening to me, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Great, thank you, Tom. Some questions for Tom? Sure, there are tons.
Yeah.
My name's David Delzer from Hatch, so great.
Oh, yeah.
Great presentation.
I didn't know you were from Hatch.
There's a case of whiskey for you at the back.
I guess my question is just, you talked about being economical today with these technologies.
Yeah.
And you talked about the existential problem with climate change.
Yeah.
How do you value that into your economic models?
Well, we don't, right? That macroeconomic picture is beyond my purview. The best I can do to affect it is to talk to people like you, like spread the word. But when we invest in a technology, like Hydrostorm is an example of what we call systemic innovation. By systemic innovation, I mean you take known materials, known engineering techniques, all the subsurface stuff is bog standard for this room, known engineering techniques, known manufacturing equipment, well understood supply chains. So the innovation exists at the systemic level, right? Everything on that Hydrostorm system is well understood by the utilities and by the mining sector. So a utility, when we put so AECOM out of Houston is our primary EPC. They're the ones that are at the head of the line bidding on projects on behalf of Hydrostorm, and they're the ones putting a performance wrap around the system, saying to the utility, it's on our balance sheet that we guarantee that thing will work. The reason AECOM can do that is there's nothing new there. Those are big pieces of spinning equipment they've seen before. So that's kind of how we view the scale issue. Yes, and I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Well, I guess,
yeah.
I mean, if I'm comparing like an off-grid mine,
Right.
I've got the cost of diesel generation.
Yeah,
If I eliminate CO2 from the equation,
yeah,
there's, you know, as we stand today, there's not really an economic driver.
That's right.
To
That's right.
incent that.
yeah, yeah. No, we assume that you have to beat the incumbent without a price on carbon. No, nothing we invest in requires regulatory change, requires a price on carbon. Everything we do can compete in the market today. Those policy considerations are accelerants. And yes, I'm selling my own book. Yes, it makes me more money if it's a price on carbon. But I'm speaking as a human being. That's why we need it. So that's what I mean by all things being equal. 5 years ago, if you talked to a corporate executive and you said, I've got a clean energy project for you, energy efficiency across your building portfolio, and it had an 18-month payback, they'd say, needs to be 9, comes out of my operating budget. That's 5 years ago. My partner in Quebec runs her own engineering shop. She's killing it on paybacks that are 2 and even 3 years long. They're profitable because the cost of capital is still more than pays for the cost of capital. The irony is this, companies used to want paybacks under a year because it came out of the operating budget, not the capital budget. Their capital budget is for strategically important stuff. If you're a t-shirt factory, you buy a t-shirt machine, right? The return on capital, best executives in the world are getting 8 to 14%. That's what you can make on your core equity in your core business. The returns on energy efficiency are 30, 40, 50%. So it's ironic that it has to come out of the operating budget when it's better spent coming out of your capital budget. That isn't a change in economics. That's a change in mindset of the CFO. That's what's happening. There are executives, particularly in the built environment, who are willing now to say, I'll take a 3-year payback, all else being equal, because it's the right decision to make, and it's a long-term decision, and so on and so on and so forth. So that's what so yes, it has to be profitable. Of course, there has to be a reason to do it that's economic, but all else being equal, that wasn't enough 5 years ago. You had to knock it out of the park from an economic perspective. Now you got to just kind of have an even balance, I think.
Other questions for Tom?
Hi, Tom. Good to see you. Thanks for your talk.
If I had known you were here, I would have toned it down a little bit.
Good. Just curious about when you're engaging the EPCs,
Yeah.
which was a big theme in the Cleantech strategy table.
Right.
What are some of the barriers to them hearing what you're saying and being interested, or are they all interested?
No, they're not all interested. Some are more interested than others. Hatch has always made a claim to being at the forefront of microgrid stuff. I don't know if it was strategic or whether they've walked into that opportunity, but they made that decision a while back. I think it's ultimately going to get driven by who their customers are and the kind of relationship they have with their end client. If their end client are leading actors and they're pushing the envelope, that APC will have to respond. So I think cultures have been built within engineering shops that reflect the nature and priorities of their clients that will shift over time. But I think that's a cultural phenomenon. It's not an intellectual phenomenon. One person's not smarter than the other. That's just cultural. And I think the pressure coming from the client side is getting a little more robust now. People are saying, look, I need to find something, even if it's greenwash, give me one project. I got to put it in my annual report. Well, that starts a conversation, right? Yeah.
Time for one more question. Anyone? There we go.
Tom, in your experience, in terms of shifting the mindset of the C-suite.
Could you just hang on till we get you a mic there?
Oh.
There we go.
Thanks. So I'm not yelling now, Tom. Nice to see you again. Tom, just in terms of shifting that mindset of the C-suite, and you said that there's been quite a shift over the last 5 years. What should we double down on in those 5 years? What's been the biggest thing that we can then leverage again in the next 5?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I think over the last 5 years, what happened was people had conversations with their peers, and it's no longer okay not to act on this problem or not to be aware of it, whether it's around the kitchen table or whether it's over the back fence with your colleagues. You just can't look aside on this problem anymore if you're educated. And I think that affected a lot of conversations. And I think, management changes over. People get older, people move up. I remember giving a talk at the Youth Oil Congress in Edmonton a few years back. And by youth, I don't mean like 18-year-olds, I mean like 45 and under. These were the next generation of C-suite leaders from around the world in the oil field. They were absolutely eager to hear what I had to say. They pushed hard on my arguments, sometimes incorrectly. But it was clear they said, look, the engineering capacity, the smarts, the capital, they knew the power of their incumbency to be part of the solution. And they were biting at the bit and held back by chairmen of the board who were just kind of old and decrepit, honestly. And I think I've had conversations with chairmen of pension funds who didn't know the difference between soot and CO2. And they owned a fleet of coal all over the world. To not know the difference between soot and CO2 and you're the chairman of a pension fund that owns coal assets, it's not okay. So I think that's kind of changing, right? People are just becoming more aware. But over the next 5 years, which is the point of your question, next up are the financial players. So we have a number of so OMERS is one of our lead investors in Fund 2. OMERS is obviously expecting a return on their capital, but we're not going to move the needle for OMERS. Like, it's a $20 million investment. They're $100 billion. They invested in us because they understand that their oil and gas assets are at risk and they don't really know what to do about it. And they understand something is happening on the Cleantech side that could give a lot of the rest of their portfolio an economic advantage. First introduction they made on our investment in Parity, which is building efficiency stuff, was to introduce us to Oxford Properties. So the financial players beginning to understand, well, we own all the infrastructure that's going to get rewired. We should figure out how to play here. And those financial actors, and there's a couple of other big funds I can't announce yet that are coming in, for much the same reason. It's pocket change for them, $20–25 million. But it's very strategic pocket change. They're looking for a way to figure out that changing world from a defensive perspective, but also to go on offense, to figure out how they can use that as an advantage. That's the next penny to drop, is the financial sector getting a little more serious about this. And the opportunity is, And I've been waving my arms about this issue for a long time, right? What we're going to do, possibility of Cleantech, blah, 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 blah. The ball's in our court now, right? So if what I've been saying is true, and Hydrostorm can deliver that kind of project with those kinds of economics, but we now have doors open to get that done, right? So now it's going to be interesting, because if we can deliver on the promises that we've been making, we now have partners capable of pulling us into market. And that's up to us. That's good. Like, let's make sure that we work, and we are. And I know my portfolio, but that's what they're stress testing us now. Okay, Tom, talked the big game for a while now. I'm going to introduce you to Oxford Properties on this. I'm going to introduce you to that mining company on that. Let's see how those conversations go. And they're going well so far. So it's not just the money they bring, it's the potential partnerships and the level at which they make those introductions. So it's a priority conversation in the C-suite at Oxford Properties. It's not just someone knocking on the door saying, I can save you some money. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Tom.
Thanks.
Thank you.